On Thursday evening, one of the locks on one of our church doors here froze up, and the key would not turn. And we needed to get that door locked. Unfortunately for us, our congregation's financial secretary, Roger, had a previous career working in door hardware, and he knows how to take apart a lock and fix it. So I got to be the assistant locksmith on Thursday night. I was holding the light, and even I got to do a little bit of the work, but I had never seen a lock taken apart before. It's pretty amazing to see how they work. So there's basically two pieces to it. There's an outer cylinder that has a hole in the middle, and then there's a smaller cylinder that slides into that hole. Each of them has 6 little holes in them, and into those 6 little holes go 6 tiny little springs. So there's 6 tiny little springs on the inner cylinder and 6 tiny little springs on the outer one. And then there are pins that go in behind those springs. So when you line up the lock, all those pins and springs push between those holes, and that's why the inner cylinder won't turn, because those springs get it all out of whack. Now, if you look at a key, it's got all those little grooves, right? Well, those dictate how long the pins need to be. So if you imagine a family of 6 standing up here, and mom and dad are different heights, and then you got some kids, maybe twins that are the same height, and then a couple more that are different heights, right? So you get this kind of a thing. When you put all of a key into a lock, what it basically does is put all their heads to the same height. All those pins line up, and then the inner cylinder will turn. If you put the wrong key in, it won't turn, and that's because even though it goes all the way in, it pushes all those pins and springs, but they now don't line up in the way that allows those 2 cylinders to turn. I learned all of this on Thursday. It was fantastic. But what it means is, when all of those pins line up, you can unlock the door. But if they're not lined up, you can't. In this most recent stretch of the Sermon on the Mount we hear today, Jesus tells us to be perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect. And when I hear perfect, the first thing I think of is what? Impossible, right? It's impossible. It's perfect, it's blemish-free, it's mistake-free, it's failure-free, it's getting everything right all the time. But the Greek word that sits behind this has a little bit of a different sense to it. It's more about completion as opposed to perfection. It's more about our actions coming fully in line with God's will for the world. And that to me does not sound like something that I have to get perfectly right, but it's a journey that we're on to where all of what we do comes in line with God's will. Now, if we think about God's will, we can turn to the Old Testament and hear the prophet Isaiah talk about all the peoples of the world streaming up the mountain and the swords being beaten into plowshares. We can hear it also in Isaiah about the feast that the Lord is going to host on the mountain for all peoples, and death swallowed up and tears wiped away from every eye. We hear the same thing in Revelation, that the new heaven and a new earth, the new Jerusalem is going to come down, and the tears will be wiped away from every eye. We hear in the New Testament Jesus comes to reconcile the whole creation. And in that way, God's will has this sort of completeness to it, that all of the creation will one day get reconciled to God. And we would say that when Jesus died and was raised, that has already happened, and we are now living into that space. So if you think about the gospel then, and the things that Jesus calls us to as the pins in a lock, there's lots of different pins of different lengths. Some of them Jesus tells us to feed hungry people. Now that's not always an easy thing to do when we're busy, but it's not a conceptually hard thing for us to get our minds around. Jesus calls on us to care for widows and orphans and people on the fringes. Jesus tells us that we have to love the Lord our God with all our hearts and our soul and our mind, and love our neighbors as ourselves. And we can line all these pins up, right? Well, today, just before he tells us to be perfect, we get one more pin that's a little bit more complicated. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. And I think what Jesus is saying with this idea of perfection is that is one more pin, and when we get that last pin in there, it's easy enough to love the people that love you, and it's easy enough maybe to do some of the other things Jesus calls us to. But if we can do this last thing that sounds really hard, then we will have that full alignment with who God created us to be, and that key will turn, and the richness of life will be unlocked for us. Now, as I have heard this commandment over the years, I've always immediately thought of enemies that for me have been far off. ISIS, terrorists. For some people, they're not that far off. I once was getting ready to preach on this text, and I had a friend who had worked in the Twin Towers. And he said, I can't pray for those enemies. Not yet. I once had a conversation with a woman who had spent her childhood, her teenage years in Germany during World War II. She was in her 90s, and she looked at me and said, "Pastor, this is not going to sound very Christian of me, but I hate the Russians." She wasn't going to be praying for the Russians. And as I have wrestled with this about these far-off enemies, whether it's Russians or it's terrorists or it's North Korea, I try to get my mind around even just praying. And sometimes we have to pray to God to allow us to pray the thing that we can't pray. But then when you think about love, love is an action, not just an emotion. So to love our enemies when they're far off is a little bit of a hard thing to do. But more recently I've been hearing these words, love your enemies, and they've come a little bit closer to home. One of the things I do, part of my job, is I meet with people and talk with people, often out in public places, restaurants or coffee shops. This week I had a conversation with someone, and it was turning to a place where it was clear we were going to start talking about current events. And they said, "I can't talk about this right now." And I was like, "No, it's okay. We can talk." And they said, "No, I can't talk about it here, because someone might hear us. And if someone hears us, they may react in some way, and I'm not interested in that sort of consequence right now." So this person had a fear of just talking about day-to-day life, what's going on in our world, because they thought there would be consequences if someone overheard them. Talked to a colleague this week who said his church has gotten quiet. People aren't talking. And when I shared the story I just shared with you, he said, "Oh, maybe that's why." I would guess that many of you are in conversations, or as you meet people now and start to talk, you try to figure out, is this person a safe person to talk to or not, from the place that I come from. And that means that we are afraid to talk to one another because we're afraid of what's going to come back at us. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had in the last several months that have begun with, "I don't understand why," and then you can fill in the blank, right? And it's always something on the other side, why they do this or why they're doing that. And so we've created this space where we have these far-off enemies, and we may have fears of them that are quite close, but we can't even get along with the people that Jesus says are easy to love, right? It's easy to love your neighbor, but we've gotten to a point where we can't even have conversation with one another. We can't even talk about the stuff that matters in life together. And I am hesitant to put that into the words persecution that Jesus uses in this text, because persecution is a very real thing. Our inability to talk to one another doesn't rise to that level. But it does land in this space, though, where Jesus is calling us to line ourselves up with God's vision for the world, where all people are reconciled, and we can't even reconcile conversations with the people that are closest to us. Now, when Jesus goes to the cross, he does exactly what he is telling us to do. When they nail those nails through his hands and feet and put him and hang him up there in this just torturous physical place, he prays for forgiveness. "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." When they taunt him, he answers with these prayers and with this compassion. He knows that the world cannot survive answering violence for violence, that the way to real, true life that we live aligned with God's vision for us is not an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's not insulting you and you insulting me back, and me not understanding you and you not understanding me back. He knows none of that is going to work. So he takes all of that to the cross, but then he comes out the other side, right, with resurrection. As I was learning about locks on Thursday night, I finally figured out how it is that different keys can unlock different doors in the same place. So some people have a key to this church that it'll unlock the front door, but it won't unlock any of the offices. But I have a master key, and it'll unlock all of the doors, right? And it has to do with the kinds of pins you put in there and the way that they line up. But Jesus is like the master key. We cannot unlock life, right? There's lots of things we can unlock and figure out in life, but we cannot unlock the fullness of life that Jesus has gifted us. He was the only one that could do that. He did that on the cross, and when he came into new life in the resurrection, he brings us the fullness of life. And yes, that comes with some tough stuff to do, like loving our enemies, even if we don't want to do that. But as we live into that space, we live into the richness of this life that God has gifted us with. It doesn't align us with God because we get it right. Jesus did that. But it's an opportunity for us to live as full human beings. Because when you have some hatred in you, you cannot be full as a human being. You cannot be whole. When you have guilt or shame, when you have people that you can't get along with and that drive you crazy, you cannot live in total peace. So Jesus gifts us this life and calls us to live into that. Well, how do we do that? I think we start with confession, like we do every Sunday in worship, and confess our inability to pray for those that we have a tough time with, to love those that are difficult to love. But then we have to maybe do a little bit more listening than talking, and we have to start trying to see the world through other people's eyes. And all of this is a journey of death and resurrection. Jesus died on the cross and came to new life, and when we talk about baptism, we talk about dying with Jesus in these waters and coming to new life. And so if we're going to get together, if we're going to live in peace, if we're going to be able to love one another in the walls of the church and outside, we're going to have to learn to die and be raised again. We have to die to the things that we don't understand and our inability to understand. We have to die to our ideologies. We have to die to the things that we are so sure are right, that becoming right is more important than the relationships right around us. We have to die to all of that. And when we die to all of that, it's not that we rebuild ourselves in a new way, but it's that Jesus starts then to put us back together. And sometimes it might just surprise us the way Jesus puts us back together. We might find out that the things we thought were so true and that we held so dear aren't so important anymore. And Jesus begins to shape us into a new and a different space. Because that's what he does. He died and was raised so that we can die again and again in these waters and be raised into new and more whole people that can bring light into the world. One of the things I've experienced at every church I've been at is a lack of idea of where all of the keys are. Right? So if you go into any church office and say, how many keys to the church are there? There's probably a total count. And if you say, where are they? They'll say, well, we know where some of them are. Because sometimes people move away and forget to get back their key. And sometimes people die and nobody knows where the key was. Sometimes people lose their keys. And so you got these keys that are all kind of spread out there, right? Well, one of the ways that we can think about the way that we live is Luther talked about us being little Jesuses that run around in the world. And I would say today that we all, because of this baptism and the meal that we share, are all copies of the master key. And as much as it's not great to have keys all over that to the building get lost, I think it is good that the church is scattered all over the world, copies of this master key that land wherever they land. Because if we go out as copies of this master key that seek to align ourselves the best we can with God's vision for the world, that means we bring with us love and grace and mercy and reconciliation. And when we take that as copies of the master key, we start to unlock life. Not because we do, but because Jesus has unlocked it for us. And we bring that with us. And we bring it every conversation that we have one at a time. We bring it one prayer at a time. We bring it one act of forgiveness at a time. We bring it one act of mercy at a time. One act of love at a time. For those that are closest to us and easy to love, and for those that are hard to love. And in that place, we may not think of it as perfection, but it is that complete love and grace that Jesus talks about falls on the righteous and the unrighteous, because God's grace knows no bounds. Amen.